Welcome to a special episode of the Two Girls with Grief podcast, the Dead Dads Club episode. We will return next week with our regular programming with episode 12, and we are your hosts. I'm Kendall Rogers.
And I'm Rachel Dwyer. So this episode won't follow the same format as we usually do. Kendall and I both lost our dads in October. Kendall lost her dad at the end of September, October 1st. My dad passed away October 14th. So we just felt it was right to do a special episode honoring our dads and their death anniversaries. We're both part of the Dead Dads Club that no one wants to join. Unfortunately, I'm also a member of the Dead Moms Club and the Dead Sisters Club. I have too many memberships to keep track of, honestly. But this one's in honor of our dads. It's something we have in common. I guess it started bringing us together because my dad was the first one to pass away. So welcome to the episode.
I'm really interested to talk to you since this was like your first loss and this being also my first loss. But where are you with your grief today?
So today was bad because I forgot the girl's name, but I started this like early in the morning. I watched a video of this girl and she lost her sister and she posted a video of her sister and her, and it said like she's so happy she has this video of her sister. And I always think about that because I feel like my sister passed away 8 years ago, and it's before I feel like iPhones were as great as they are now, and we weren't taking as many videos of each other. I feel like we have some when we were like super young. I don't even know where they are. But like more recent ones as like adults, I don't really have that. So it's something I think about, and that just like really set off the tears. And like since then, I feel like every little griefy thing has made me cry. So I feel like I am severely dehydrated today. So
get your glasses of water.
Yeah, so if you see me drinking a lot, even though I drink water every episode, today might be more. So what about you?
Yeah, well, similarly, it's a hard month, and as you can probably tell, I have a little bit of a cold today. And not that a cold reminds me of like my grief, but it does remind me of the times when your parents take care of you. And now I have to like take care of myself. And it's kind of sad because you just want someone to be there and know what to do and know how to handle things. But now I'm sick and I'm like, okay, what do I got to take? And what do I got to do to like make myself get over this? And I don't know, it's just been like a little sad reminder of, I don't want to say the good days of being sick as a kid, but like having like your parents be there and be like just taking care of you. It's just like a nice feeling, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the feeling of being taken care of is something you don't realize you miss so much when there's no one taking care of you like that anymore.
Right.
Yeah, like no one giving you popsicles and Sprite, which was I feel like the go-to cure, which I'm sure that didn't help, like giving your kid a bunch of sugar, but like that was something my parents did, was give me Sprite and popsicles. So it helped, and I do think about that sometimes, but I don't really get that because I'm like, I don't think that actually helped me. It just
made it worse.
It's a comforting thought, but
Right,
I don't know
yeah.
that it actually like cured me at all. But in this episode, we're going to share a little bit about our dads and the backstory and kind of how they passed away. Do you want to kick it off, Kendall?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with like maybe the part that incited the whole thing was that my dad had type 1 diabetes. And what's funny now is that there's so much research being done with type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed as an adult, which is kind of rare. You're usually diagnosed as a child. So like there's now a thing called like diabetes 1.5, where it's like you don't fit the normal type 1 diabetes criteria. But yeah, I guess my dad, I just smile when I think of him because he was just like so happy-go-lucky and a true Pisces. Like I have never met a Pisces so Pisces in someone's life.
Fellow Pisces, shout out to your
Shout
dad.
He was just like the peacemaker. He was always just so logical. He was always caring for people. I have just like endless stories of him doing kind things for other people with no expectation of something in return. I think that's why it's hard for me to think about everything that happened in regard to his passing, because a lot of people assume that when you're a good person, you're going to live a long and happy life. It's just like, I don't know, something we just expect. And I think everybody in my family and all his friends agree. Like, he was the happiest, kindest person out of us all. And then for him to have such like a young and untimely death is like really kind of like reality shattering. But yes, I think 2 years prior to his passing, his health began to decline, primarily due to the type 1 diabetes. He was managing it manually, and then we went to a pump, and it just kind of got crazy. During this time, my parents got a divorce, and just like there was a lot of change. And it was actually, I think, like a day or two before Father's Day in 2020. He had a stroke, and I was with him that night. So that I think of that. I don't like to think about that memory, because that was a really hard moment of like, that's when everything changed. That's when he became like bedbound for the rest of essentially his life. There was ups and downs, ups and downs. It was like he was in a coma, he was out of a coma, he was on a ventilator, he was off a ventilator. It was just like you thought you were close to the end, and then all of a sudden things got better. But yeah, I felt like from June to about October 1, I was like living in a hospital, which was also odd because this is COVID, and there'd be times when the COVID numbers in our county here were so high that they'd have to shut down the hospitals and not allow visitors in. And me being his power of attorney, it was very difficult to just do things over the phone with a doctor, and they're asking you stuff and you're like, I don't know what that is. Or they're like, we need to do this surgery. And I'm like, but we already did this surgery a month ago. Do we need to do it again? That's when I started taking over a lot of like his bills and his accounts and everything. Yeah. And then I think like specifically in like the moments, I got a lot of calls in like the middle of the night. In fact, I think that's part of the reason why I'm not a big phone call person anymore, is like you got so many phone calls from doctors. You're kind of like, I'm just dreading the next phone call I get. But I remember late September 30th, I got a call from this point, he, I think, was at like a rehab center. And they were like, he's had a heart attack, and we're letting you know. And it was like 11:30 or 11:45. And if I start crying, I apologize, but I feel like I'm in good company. I have a picture. If I could turn the camera, I would, but I have a picture up on my wall of his parents. So both my grandparents on my dad's side on their wedding day. And I had it like just hung up wherever I kind of lived. I don't know really what to do with it. It felt weird to like put it away, but I had it hung up in my room. And like, I don't think I ever prayed so hard in my life. And I was like, if this is it, then you better be there for him. And 15 minutes later, they were like, sorry to say, he's passed. And I don't think I knew what to do either. I was just kind of like, okay, what's like the next steps? Like, no one taught me what to do next. So I called my uncle, his brother, because I was like, there's got to be an adult to figure out what to do, not me. I'm calling nonstop. I can't seem to wake them up. I'm like, of course, the one time I need them to wake up, they're dead asleep. Finally, I get them awake, and I couldn't even say the words. I was like, just sobbing. I think I also started just driving there to their house, because I was like, if they're not going to wake up from a phone call, they're going to wake up from me pounding on the door. I finally get them awake, and I think they just knew. I think they just knew from my voice. Finally, I choke it out. My sister was at my aunt and uncle's too, and I was like, I don't know if I can tell her. Like, I didn't want that memory, like, clicked onto me, I guess. So very fortunately and kindly, my aunt woke her up and told her, so that by the time I got there, she was primed to everything. Then we called my brother, and we got the whole family, and then we just sat around the kitchen table just in silence. And no, but I don't think any of us like knew or like what were the next steps. I had no clue. So then I like had to call and figure out what to do, because this is also COVID time, so everything was like a little weird. And then by that point, like, fortunately, my uncle and aunt had an idea of like how they wanted things to pan out, and they've done it before with their parents, so fortunately they kind of had like a game plan. But yeah, that's kind of I don't know, most of the story, I feel like, of what happened with my dad.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, were you even able to go see him at the hospital right after because it was COVID?
Uh, no, in fact, like he was already called by the ambulance person, and so they did like the time of death moment there. And I was like, what do I got to do next? Do I need to go like have a what are those things called for the crime people? An autopsy? Like what do you do? I was like
Like, what do you do? I
I
don't.
was like, tell me what I need to do. And they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, I don't know either. And so fortunately, yeah, I think they moved him somewhere, or I think, like, I don't know where they keep bodies, and then I called a funeral. Yeah, a morgue, yeah. Yeah, there was I don't know, I don't know how they do this on the back end with funeral people, but we knew the funeral home we're gonna have the ceremony and everything at, and so they, like, corresponded with a funeral home up here and worked with them, and so they picked him up and held him for, like, because this was midnight, nobody's fucking awake. So, the next day, the funeral people sent somebody out to go pick him up, and, like, this is a drive, this is Texas, like, this is hours on hours on hours, and I just kept thinking, like, I didn't know, like, to have my dad buried where he grew up, like, it was gonna take someone having to, like, a weird thought of, like, someone at a funeral home got in a car, drove up to DFW, 6 hours, picked up a dead body, my dad, drove another 6 hours south again, like, that whole process is kind of wild to me.
It is. It's really weird to think about
It is weird to
just
think about.
all of that stuff. There's just so much responsibility of just their body once they pass away. And it's just, there's
Yeah.
so many different things with that.
It's weird because it feels like it happens quickly, but it also happens slowly, like, simultaneously, like, at some points, I'm like, "Am I making the right decisions?" Because I feel like I'm having to make a lot of decisions really quickly, but then also, I'm like, "I feel like this is taking forever, like, how come I'm not getting responses back in time?"
Yeah. It feels like slow-mo, like, because like the world
Yeah,
just like all of a sudden shifted and you're like, I need to get these things done, but the world it's slow.
yeah. I wanna talk about the next day, but we can talk about that after we talk about your backstory, but yeah, I wanna talk about, like, that initial moment and, like, what do you do the day after? Like, that's a whole different mindset.
Yeah. I mean, my dad also had diabetes, but he got diagnosed probably when I
Ding.
was in middle school, but it was like type 2. I mean,
Mhm.
now I'm like, God, if Ozempic existed back then, I
Yes.
feel like it would have changed his life,
Yeah.
honestly.
I think about that all
Um,
the time.
yeah, my dad he also had depression, so I think that didn't help, like, him get control over his diabetes.
Yeah.
You know, I think usually it's like if he was in the right mindset, like he would been able to lose the weight and like get in a place to maybe get his diabetes, like I think you can get, I don't know if the word dormant, like, but you can get your diabetes to basically like be okay because it
Mhm.
is type 2, but he just wasn't able to do that, and he had some health issues because of the diabetes. And you know, at one point he had open heart surgery when I was in college, and I had to spend my summer like him recuperating and like making sure he was okay before he could
Yeah.
fly, because he moved back to the Philippines when I was a senior in high school. So he had to like, he stayed for the summer and was just getting right. We stayed at his brother's place, and but it wasn't until I was, I think, 25 that he actually passed away. And it was right after my sister like had been in a coma. She was out. She was in the hospital for like 3.5 months, and then like I think like 2 months later is when my dad
Oh my gosh.
passed away. And he like wasn't doing that well, but it was also hard because he's in another country. My sister had been in a coma. Like there was so
Yeah.
much going on, and I just remember I kept calling him and like could not get a hold of him, and his help was like, shady. I couldn't get a hold of him. When I finally got a hold of him, he was slurring his words. Like it was not okay, and I was freaking out. So I we had other family that lived in that area, so I like called these people to get someone to go check on him. And then he got rushed to the hospital and over there, and then it was like, oh, okay, we have to fly there because it's not good. And like, so you had to fly across the country. My sister couldn't just like fly over there because she still had to get medication. We didn't know how long we were going to be there for. So they needed an extra day to figure it out. So I flew by myself the next day and like not knowing what was going to happen, and I had to go to like this province. And I remember that like a second cousin offered like, oh, I'll pick you up from the airport. I was like, okay, thank you. Like, and what they ended up doing was sending a driver to pick me up, but they didn't say anything about it. And then the driver was like, when I got there, like, oh, you have to pay me money. And I was like, my dad just died. You offered to pick me up. The hotel that I was staying at actually would have picked me up, but
Right.
you offered. And now the only pesos that I have, because it was just emergency, I'm giving to you. I remember I was just like, I was like, what the heck? Like, I
Yeah.
started being so pissed off, and I was like freaking out because I was like in another country. I wasn't ready, didn't have all my stuff ready. And then, so I was alone there, and I went to go see my dad, and he wasn't able to speak, but he was like awake, and he was able to acknowledge I was there, like, and he said, I love you. And I just remember like hearing, like, talking to the doctor, and the doctor was hitting on me as I'm like
What?
bawling. Yeah, he was hitting on me as I was like bawling, crying, and like not even noticing. And that's where it's like a cultural, I don't know, it was just weird. And I was like, I am crying about my dad right now. And like, he was not in a good place. Like, he'd been avoiding like video calls, and I think it's because he had let himself go a bit more and wasn't healthy. And so it was like so shocking. And then the next day my sister and my brother arrived, but then my dad had passed away. Like, they'd seen him, but he wasn't awake, and he passed away. And it was just, it's even weirder in a country that you're not like familiar with. Like, yes, I'm 75% Filipino, but like, we didn't speak the language. We were in a province. Like, I didn't really know what to do. And it's a weird thing when you go and like, you have to figure all this stuff out. But he had a heart attack, which is what made him pass away. But he just like was not in a good place. And it's just hard because it was like kind of a blur of like my sister. Like, we didn't know my sister was going to survive, like when she was in a coma. And then my dad like end up having this stuff. So it was like not great timing, but like not like you have control over those things.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really hard to like be there and then be alone. And I remember just like in a hotel in the middle of nowhere and trying to figure out what to do, and just like feel so alone. You know, it's hard to like advocate for something or figure things out when like you're in a place that's like not super familiar,
Yeah.
and in a hospital in another country. So yeah, it was really hard, and like a lot of just like a lot to take on in like a short period of time. It's like
For sure.
when you
Yeah.
think like one thing calms down, it's like, no, it's not. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't get better sometimes for a
Well,
while.
I know what it's like to live in a country, be so familiar with the language that I'm speaking, and still be confused when you go to a hospital and be like, what is this terminology that you're speaking? What is all this medical stuff that you're saying? You're having to Google things, and then to go to another country and just have all this uncertainty, and you're like, am I hearing things right? Like, am I understanding this
Yeah.
correctly? Because like, if the medical terminology and the language you are familiar with is already difficult enough, I can't imagine what it's like having to like refresh your brain on like really advanced words that you're not using all the time.
Yeah. And it was a lot. I think that's why it also took me so long to be able to speak on anything, because it's just like, I don't even think I acknowledge how quickly some things happened.
Yeah.
Or like how crazy some things were. But yeah, that was the start, not even like the middle of the journey, really. It was not even the start, because everything with my sister happened before that.
Yeah. And like, it just sounds like such a even just loss in general is such a surreal experience, but this sounds like a very surreal experience, like a weird bad dream, but, like, you're kinda touching on this a little bit, but I wanna, like, dive into it because I think, like, those first few days after loss is such a, like it's a blur, but it's also the strangest feeling you've ever felt, like, I
Yeah.
wanna, like, talk about that shock that you feel, that disbelief that you have right after the loss.
Yeah. I mean, it's so weird. And we've talked about just how weird it is to see their like body
Mhm.
and it doesn't they're not there anymore. That is like so weird. Like that is just very traumatic and you try to think of all the things, but it's like the first time that happens like that close of a relationship. And I think you always think like oh this won't actually happen and then it does
Yeah.
and you're like, "Oh, okay, it's this is actually really shitty." And I think luckily by that time my sister and my brother were there, but like and so we weren't alone, but it's the weirdest feeling. Like someone is just gone and then you're trying to figure out like all all the pieces of like that has to go with it and then it's like you have to figure out all the stuff and like right after like we had to pay to like get his body and like we didn't have cash with like we didn't have money with us because we didn't have like pesos and stuff and like they like wouldn't release his body and what's crazy is their like morgue is an outdoor area
What?
and this is the Philippines so it is hot so we're
Yeah.
freaking out because we're like you don't even have a refrigerated like room
Yeah.
and so we're freaking out and like thankfully my stepdad who's like a saint he actually paid like he
Mhm.
transferred money to the hospital and like we got our dad out so like thankfully he like took care of all of that and like it's such a crazy feeling of like
Yeah.
doing all of that and like you stress of like it's another country you don't know the rules you don't know everything
Right.
you're trying to figure it out and like it's just that adds extra stress we're like calling our mom and they're divorced so like you know she's trying to help I think one of my aunts ended up also sending money it was just like a whole thing um that's just like very stressful and like you don't even have time to think about it but then you're
No,
like
you
we saw
don't.
our dad in a room where it's like okay we need to get him out of there we need to get him to another place it's so weird to see them like that and no longer here and just you have to do so many things immediately that are stressful that you don't even like have time to accept like what that really means
Yeah.
and I think like the first time I actually realized it was like we were like outside of the crematorium and I was just like okay this is life like this is actually happening this is weird like how did this become my life you know with my sister this like I felt like life was easy before that in a sense I was like the baby of the family like I felt like everything felt easy and then I'm like why is all of a sudden like all this crap happening
Yeah.
but it's really hard it doesn't get easier when it keeps happening either but I think I also like that we're doing this episode because I feel like because he passed away first I feel like I kind of push that away, you know, because it's like then my sister and my mom. So it's like you could only hold on to so much at a time, and then it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
you can't do it all. So I think because of that, my dad kind of got pushed to the side. I was sad about obviously I still sad about it, but I feel like I don't talk about it as much because he was first.
Mhm.
And then you just keep taking on more. So I'm glad we're doing this episode because I feel like you know, me and my dad were really close. We had a special relationship, and I don't talk about him that much. But what was it like for you? Kind of that like initial shock and feeling.
Yeah, same thing. I the night I went to my uncle's and told my sister, I stayed with my sister and we shared a bed that night just because something was like I just didn't wanna be alone, I guess, like, I also didn't want her to be alone either. My brother was with my mom, so, like, I wasn't concerned, but I think, like, the next couple nights afterwards, because we went down south, like, she and I s fell asleep crying, but I remember waking up really early the next day because you just don't sleep well, and I'm driving back to my apartment because I have to get some shit, to start doing stuff, right? Like I need to get papers, I need to like know things. Got to start calling. And as I'm driving there, I see like the most beautiful sunrise, and it pissed me off. I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like this should be the ugliest day. Like I shouldn't. Why would God put up the most beautiful sunrise?" And I was just like so like numb to that, being like, I'm having the worst day of my life right now. But since it was COVID times, like I didn't get to see my dad immediately until after we were already down there, down south in his hometown planning the funeral. And I think like I was upset, and in my heart I knew he had passed on. And in some sense I also was like he had suffered so much. He had gone through so much medical stuff, and in some sense I was like I'm glad that's done for him, because I I just it pained me just to see him, like, not to be so crass, but, like, withering away in a bed, and knowing he was such an active guy, knowing that he loved going outside, knowing that, like, he would rather do anything but be lazy and stay in bed, and just, like, medical reasons. And so in some sense, I was like, "I'm so happy, like, he's not in that pain anymore." But the first time we saw him was at the funeral home, and I'm very fortunate that my aunt was with us when we did this, because it was just talk about a same thing, a very weird experience of seeing your loved one dead. They had him in, like, a little room to the side. I'm having to pick caskets, I'm having to pick all this stuff. I'm just like, "This is overwhelming." And talk about, like, bringing up the costs of, like, funerals. Like, if you've never done this before, this is shocking. Like, if you don't know the numbers, you don't know what's normal to expect, you don't know if,
Yeah.
like, you're being conned, or if you're paying too much, if you're not paying enough, like, you have no clue. And so, I just kept thinking, like, I hope this is right. I hope we'll have enough money to pay for this." Like, I don't know. I'm just having to, like, keep writing checks because I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And it also felt weird that, like, I wasn't I had this weird thing of, like, it occurred to me that I was now in charge. Like, I was now in charge of his whole thing. It's one thing to, like, manage it and him still be alive, but it was another thing to know that I am now responsible for the execution of all of this, and that was, like, a v a burden I did not want. Um, but yeah, we went into, like, and God bless funeral homes. I know they're trying to do the best for the situation. Like, there's no way trying to make death pretty is gonna look good, you know? But it was very odd to see, like, he's in this little room, he has, like, this, like, velvet cloth on him, and I just remember thinking, like, "No, that's a mannequin, that's not my dad. That's just a mannequin that looks like my dad." Like, that's not yeah, there's something very, like, uncanny valley a little bit. Like, something in your brain is like, "That's not human." Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to
This is a
explain it.
mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, this was after, they've kind of already done all the stuff. So he's already kind of, like, he doesn't look dead, he looks just, like, asleep, but it was odd because 'cause they're like, "You can say whatever you want, you can, touch him if you want," like, and I was just like, "Oh, I don't know." I was like, "I don't know about this."
Like, do you want to or not? Like, yeah, it's
Yeah, and I can
I
understand how anybody like, I could totally get, like, if you're a mom and you lost a child, like, you would wanna hold your baby. I totally get that. I understand if that's, like, your spouse. Something about, like, seeing my dad in this predicament just very odd to me, because, like, I just see him as such, like, a strong person, and then seeing him, like, lying, it was very odd.
yeah.
Um but what we did do is, I did ask if we could just, like, have a clip of hair for all of us, and I was like, put this in a thing or something, like a shadow box later on. I don't know, just something tangible of his. He this was also like, the man was not materialistic, so he didn't have a lot of stuff to begin with. Even when we were divvying up things, like, he didn't really have that much. Um, and so this was, like, one of the few things, like I was like, I don't know. For some reason, just like if I ever wanted to like put it in a locket, like I didn't want to regret it later on. And
Yeah.
so we asked for that. And then, yeah. And then for like the next 2 days was the viewing and the funeral. And I think I cried the entire time. I don't think I stopped crying once. Like I was, like you said, you're dehydrated. I think I was a withered prune because I just cried out all the water of my whole body.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, those initial days, it's hard to even think back because I think I forgot so much of it too. There's things that people bring up to me and I'm like, I didn't even pay attention. I totally forgot about that. Like it did not occur to me because you're just focused on other things.
I don't even remember the night back or any like I don't remember what we did at the hotel. I don't remember so much of
Yeah.
that. And yeah, it's all a blur, especially now with like so much family trauma. But
Yeah.
I definitely I'm sure I cuddled my sister because my sister was super huggy and I wasn't, but she was.
Oh.
And I'm sure we slept in the same bed and
Yeah.
she cuddled me or something, but I really don't remember like that. I remember when he went back to his like house and cleaned it out and did all this stuff. Like I remember we got this whole crew to help like go through all the stuff, and I just remember it started raining and there was a box of stuff and like it was a box of photos, and I just remember freaking out and I was like crying like I'm like take this out of the rain. I was like trying to pick out all the photos from the
Yeah.
box and like I was like, why is no one helping me? Like I'm just freaking out. It's all these photos of my dad, and I was just like, how many other things are getting wet of my dad's stuff? And it's just a weird experience in general to like
Yeah.
go through their stuff, and it's like you have to just get rid of everything, and you're selling off stuff because like we don't live there. We're just trying to
Mhm.
sell a lot of stuff. We found out like the people helping him were just taking money from him at some point, and like
Oh my
all these
gosh.
bills weren't paid, so we were like figuring out all this stuff, and it was craziness. It was just like so stressful and hectic that like I don't remember most of that. I do remember like watching some of the sunsets and sunrises, I think, with my sister and my brother. It's definitely a
Yeah.
blur for so much of that. I do think of him obviously like, pretty often, but I feel like it's in the back of my mind. But I do try to think of the things like I miss about him most, and I sometimes get reminded by Facebook memories. But like,
Aw.
what are some of the things that you miss most about your dad?
Yeah. I miss just this unreasonable amount of happiness he had to a point where it was annoying for sure. I did not get that from him. Um, he always saw he was very much an optimist, always saw the good side of things, always believed in the goodness in people to a point where I'm sure a lot of people probably try to take advantage of that, but um, he was always trying to make people laugh. Like I think that was like his like God-given gift was being goofy and silly and just I don't know, this very pure, wholesome, like, light in him. Yeah, those and just I try to remind myself so much just how charitable he was as well. I feel like you don't see that level of, like, like, literally give the shirt off your back to somebody who needs it. For some like, he had that really ingrained in him that he was so lucky where he is in life, and he wanted to give out as much good as he had ever received. And I think that's a mindset I try to remind myself a lot of is trying to give back in various ways. My dad was a very simple man, and I think that sums it up was he was just very kind and just cheesy and just very happy all the time. But tell me about your dad.
What I miss most about my dad is just like he was so proud of me for like everything. Like,
Oh my god, I'm gonna start crying.
yeah, I feel like I'm just very crying today. But he, yeah, he just was like so proud of everything. Everything I did was magic. Like he believed in me. I would do everything. I was capable of everything.
Well,
And so just like it's so nice when like someone just believes in you
yeah.
for everything. And I think that's just what I miss the most, is just like someone that just like will support you for everything, like just thinks you're the most amazing thing to ever exist.
Yeah.
And I mean, I even found out like, he was big on like, you should travel, you should experience life. And my sister moved to New York, I think sometime after, like maybe a couple years after she graduated college, or maybe right after she graduated college, I'm not sure. But my sister moved to New York and she didn't have a job. She's moving there with her boyfriend, and I was like so upset because I was like, don't leave me, what the heck, like you can't
Yeah.
leave me. And she didn't have a job yet, and I was like, you're so irresponsible, all this different stuff. And my sister was so much better at like taking a leap than I was. I was like goody two shoes, like didn't do that. And I found out later on that my dad was helping her pay rent for a few months until she found a job, because he just supported her going to New York and like experiencing life and doing something new. And I was like, that's so nice. Like that's just like my dad. Like he would do anything for us. So I think it's just nice that someone just thinks you're like the most magical thing to exist. Like that's just a nice feeling. And you
Yeah.
don't really always appreciate it at the time because you're like, oh, that's, being a dad. But without it, I'm not even on my period. I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know why I've cried so much today.
No, but you're
But yeah,
totally right. There's something like it's a scary feeling when you lose that person and you don't have that net anymore, and you don't have that feeling of like, who is gonna unconditionally believe in me as much as like that person, like in our cases our dad. But it's scary. It's like scary to
it's
go on in
scary.
life.
It is, because you kind of just have to blind faith that you're going to be able to do it. And I think so much grief has like changed everything about me and everything I care about. And
Yeah.
trying to find like equilibrium is just really hard. You're trying to figure out who you are, and you're having to go out in new waters, and like that support system is gone. And it just makes everything so much harder because you don't have people to bounce back ideas on. And it's like, if you fail, there's no net.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard. It's like I always felt like I was free to do whatever because I had that net, and I don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And that really, I feel like, changes everything, in so many ways. We're just like, it's so much harder. But I also try not to be as cautious as I was. So it's definitely like a kind of a balance that I still don't know that I've created or like found yet.
Yeah. I feel like very similar in a sense that like I was also very like timid about things and not a risk taker, but now when you lose somebody, you now have this reality of that you yourself is going to die and you don't know when that will be. And how do you want to live that life? It's like all of a sudden like I've had the same thing of like I can't wait anymore to like want to fulfill these dreams that I have. It's like I have to do them now because I don't know how long I'm going to have. And
Yeah, I don't like to it's a balance of like thinking like that, and then also like I just want to live the best life I can. And I think it's hard because I definitely know that I feel like I just kind of closed down
mhm.
for a while, where I don't think I was like letting any new people in or just being open. Because, like we said, like we haven't even talked about this stuff until like this year. Like I haven't
Mhm.
talked about it. My dad passed away 10 years ago, and this is the most I've talked about it ever. So it's been a while. It's a long time coming. And it's just now that I feel like even close to feeling more normal. And then finding friends, like you and in our support group, where it just feels so much more normal to be in that space and talk about it and just let it all out. And
Yeah.
then people get it, and it's more freeing, and actually doing stuff to like heal with it. And like this podcast, I mean, we've had so many more people reach out and just share that our podcast has helped them feel less alone, or something they listen to in the middle of the night when they can't sleep. And I think people that experience grief like understand that feeling.
Yeah.
Just getting some really nice things said about our podcast, which is so, I don't know, it's just like I feel like I haven't gotten those compliments since everyone in my family passed away, except my brother's still alive. But
Shout out, brother.
some like meaningful comments, like someone reached out and he said like he loves our podcast and he thinks it's special, and he said so many nice things about our podcast and just like how it's helped him. And it's like, it's so weird when people say those things that's like very real and like heartfelt compliments, because I feel like
Yeah.
it's different if like you're at work and you get like a review or so, it's not like that. It's like
Yeah.
heartfelt, something that like really means something that you really care about, and it feels like you're seen, right? Because this is all very personal topics that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
it's like when people listen, it's like they really get to know your inner soul and your inner being, which is so different than just a surface level conversation. So getting a compliment on just like something surface level is like what you're used to, but getting the
Yeah.
compliments where it's like people see you and understand you is so much more than
Yeah.
anything else.
And yeah, like you said, we're talking about the worst days of our lives and hoping that that might be helpful to people out there who are also going through the worst days. And so I feel when you send me comments and when people comment on things and message us, it is this feeling of like, I'm glad this is helpful for somebody out there, but it's also like bittersweet because they're 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 going through it. You're like, you've been there. You're like, I know exactly how that feels. And it's kind of like, I hate that you kind of hate that our worst days is a comfort to other people's worst days too. But in a sense of like, that's why it makes it all this worth it, is that it's easier when we're a community in this and that. I don't know. I found it grieving about this in a whole new light this year with talking about it with you and talking about it with our support group and, talking about it on our social channels has like really helped me explore different parts of my grief that I don't think I ever would have explored without a community like this.
Yeah, I feel like so many original thoughts that I had about my experience, like I see other people say it and I'm like, oh, okay. It's not my original feeling of this like really just horrible sadness. It's been so healing in a way, and I feel like if our stories and things we learned and things we're trying to do help other people, that it's just such a worthwhile feeling that I feel like I haven't felt that in so long, of
Yeah.
just feeling like something made sense. I think that's the biggest thing, where like when so much happens, nothing makes sense, your life feels so weird.
Yeah.
So many things don't matter to you anymore, and I feel like this is the first time where things just feel like it's easy and it's bringing something to my life. And not just like the compliments, but just like I feel like sharing our stories, it gives purpose to like keep going and making the loved ones like keep living on in their memory. It's very fulfilling that I feel like I haven't felt in too long.
Yeah. Were there any lessons that you learned from your dad or like things that maybe you learned after the fact that you carry now?
Definitely, there's a lot of things of just basically like my dad always encouraged me to travel and try new things and experience in life. I remember when I studied abroad in England, he bought me a camera and he was like, make sure that you're in the photos. He's like, you're not going to care about the photos, just the scenery and the buildings. He's like, make sure you're in the photos. And I think that's always nice. I feel like one big thing, which is funny, is my dad. I feel like he had the best advice and the best stories. I wish he like listened to his own advice to get his life kind of back on track.
Yeah.
Uh, for himself. But like I remember, I don't even know, I might have been in high school, and he was like, he just told me like, you are so great at keeping yourself entertained, you are so good at having fun in any situation. He was like, you do not need any drugs. He's like, you don't need that, you can have fun on your own. He's like, I've tried everything and it's not worth it, like you don't need it.
Oh.
And for some reason, that honest conversation that we had, I have never tried anything. And like, no like judgment, hate to anyone who does anything. I don't care. Like, live your life,
Yeah.
But I just have never felt the need to try anything because my dad told me that I have fun by myself. Have fun. Like, I don't need it. And he's like, it's just not worth it. And that just stuck with me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I don't need to try anything. I don't know if he actually thought that would work. Like, I don't think a parent would really think like, oh, if I tell my daughter this in high school or whatever it was, like, she's going to actually not try anything, especially when he said that he's tried everything. But it just stuck with me. I was like, oh, yeah, that checks out. Like, I don't need it. I just had never felt the need to do that. And my dad just thought I was like the bee's knees, just the shining star. And it just, the logic checked out at the time. And I just never felt the need to try anything. And anytime something happened, I just thought, like, my dad said I don't need it. So I just wouldn't. And yeah, I think that's something that's stuck with me. But yeah, I mean, I think also one thing that I think he's helped me with in hindsight, he dealt with depression and I saw that severe depression growing up, and I was the one like helping him, as much as I could growing up, which is obviously tough. But because I saw how low and how much he missed out because he was so depressed and like could not get out of it, I think that's helped me not fall into depression with just everything that's happened. Is because I'm like, I cannot do that. Like, I will not fall into that where I just like forego trying to live a good life. And like, I think seeing that growing up and just like being able to recognize how much he missed out on, I refuse to do that. And it's not that I don't get sad. Obviously, I said I've been crying all day, but I still have been productive. I still have done stuff. We're still doing this podcast today. Like, I'm still putting myself out there. It's always in the back of my head if I ever do feel like I'm getting sad, that I'm like, no, I cannot do it. And I also think like my dad wouldn't want me to, like, right? He thought I was like the brightest star in the sky. So it's helped me in a weird way not fall to everything that's happened. And I don't know if that's a lesson from him, but it is something that seeing that I was like, I can't do that. So like, it helps me, but I don't know if that's like a lesson he tried to teach me. It's always a good reminder to me. Like, if I'm laying down for too long, I'm like, nope, get up, do something, shower, clean something, like whatever you need to do to get back on track. And that's because of him. So it has helped me, but I think it's a weird thing because it made me like anti-depression for myself. Like, I cannot do it. So it's helped me in a very weird way to deal with everything else.
Yeah.
But what lessons do you remember most, like, your dad taught you?
Yeah. Well, first off, I love that about your dad. Like, that's just such a beautiful foundation that he laid for you, and just to see all this now, like, in you, that's like such a like a beautiful thing of like strength that he imparted on you. And like, you could definitely tell that that's something like a gift that, I don't know if you mean that's given to you, but obviously it's a choice that you live by. But like, I don't know, those are beautiful lessons. I think one kind of like the same thing with you mentioning about depression. So my mom does suffer from depression. I wonder if it is maybe hereditary in my family. I don't know. But one thing from my dad that I learned is like, happiness is a choice. It is a hard choice, but that is a choice you can make every day. And obviously not every day you're going to be happy, but like, I think of my dad, he also lost both of his parents very young. And yet, granted, I think maybe the conversation around grief was different as a parent when I was a little kid, because it wasn't really something we talked about super much. I just knew that like his father passed when he was 12, and then his mother passed, I think, I don't know, maybe in his 30s or 40s, but either way, still very young. And yet he still just had this like beaming outlook on life. And I have to consciously remind myself, like, you can choose to be happy. Like, I think sadness is maybe predisposed on me, but it's still a choice I can make every day. And that, yes, I'm going to be sad about my dad. but I can still try and evoke that love and energy he had for the world and for people in my day to day. And it doesn't make it easier. I don't know. Some days are harder than others, but I feel like trying to bring out that little bit of light that he carried within him is like worth it, you know? That's kind of like, I think the biggest lessons. There was many, but I think the big one for me, and that's ones that I'm still trying to learn through my grief, is that I can choose to be happy.
Yeah. It is a very active. I think dealing with grief
Yeah.
it is very active
It's
because
a
you
hard
can like
practice.
yeah, I always say like it's so annoying that this thing happens and then you
Yeah.
have to deal with like you have to be very active with dealing with it because
Yeah.
otherwise it just eats you away, and if you do nothing then your life just feels so much more empty, and
Yeah.
it's like you have to just do so much to make yourself feel this new normal or like a new happy semi complete person.
Yeah.
It's just like it's not fair. Like this thing happens and you have to keep working on yourself like to
Yeah.
be so much different and change and mature and grow. And I don't think people that experience grief like get enough credit for how much they have to adapt and change and like live in a world without the ones that they love. And yeah, it's crazy to reflect on just like I don't think I reflect as much on my dad's like passing because he was first,
Mhm.
but I do feel like his lessons are like a huge part of me. Like even though
Yeah.
he's been gone the longest, I feel like I hold so much of him in me and like the lessons. And I know that he'd be like if I told him like, oh, I'm starting a podcast, like he would so support it. Like, you know, he would be so happy that
My dad would be like, "What's a podcast?"
I mean, my dad would probably say that too first, but he would just be happy and believe like he would be like it's going to be the number one podcast. Like he would just like automatically
Aw.
assume that whatever I do it's going to be the best thing to ever exist.
Joe Rogan,
So,
watch out. We're coming for you.
yeah, so much better. And yeah, I just think if people more like people talk about it more, I think it's a beautiful way to think about like how much they can still inspire you and impact you even though they're gone, and their lasting impact. And I think that's what you want to do as a human is like no matter how much time you get granted on earth with your humanly body, that you made an impact on at least one person, you know, that feels your love or feels the joy you bring into the world, or something like that, you know. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do, and I think I definitely have closed myself off so many times to like even show that side of myself to other
Yeah.
people and to even be vulnerable anymore. Like I have closed that side off of me for so long. It's just like this year, like since we started this, like since I signed up for that support group training, and that's where I met Kendall. I feel like it's just been a whole other thing where I'm like, wow, there were so many things that I wasn't addressing that I was missing or needing, and it's nice to think back about at least like the positives of how they're still here, and you know what they can share, and I think the knowledge that we've gained from it, even though we are the ones that have to keep growing. Doesn't seem fair, but it's fine.
Well, one thing I love about what you talk a lot about on the podcast, and I hope when people think about the podcast that sure we're talking about grief and death and sadness and all of that, but you bring up a lot about like finding joy. And even I didn't have that like mentality prior to starting this. Like the fact that you just even mentioning like and it empowering and like encouraging people to go out and find like your little joys or your big joys, because that helps you kind of reckon with the sadness and the darkness that comes with grief. And like I hope people think of this podcast like as much as it is sad, that we're also trying to like help bring joy into people's lives too. And I think that's like such a beautiful thing that like this started from like you, and you've said that multiple times. I feel like on a lot of our episodes of like encouraging people, like you still deserve joy. You still deserve all of that amidst all your grief.
I think it's hard sometimes to think about I still have a life worth living without all the people that I want to be in this world.
Yeah.
I think that's just, even saying that loud is like, I can feel like the tears forming in my eyes.
Yeah.
But
It puts a ping in my chest
yeah,
too.
yeah, I can feel that. And but it's like it's so true. Like they would just want you to be getting as much as you can out of life. And so I think about that, and I don't think I focused on that so much. And I think so many times, like, I am the person that like does so much for people, but I don't I don't think I focus so much on like what actually makes me happy, and like not trying to like make people think of me a certain way, or like feel like I had to like be a certain way or act a certain way.
Yeah.
And like that's why even like last Christmas I said like I spent Christmas watching Hallmark movies with my dog, making my favorite food, and I had a good day. People were like freaking out about me not going to the party, and everyone was like so worried about me, but I was like, I actually have had the best Christmas that I've
Yeah.
had in many years, because I just was the first time that I just like, this is what I want to do. And you might not get it because you don't feel like a freaking orphan on Christmas,
Right.
but it's what I want to do. And if I want to watch cheesy, like 1 out of negative or like -20 on the Rotten Tomatoes score, like let me do that. And I like have my favorite food, and I have my dog, and I decorate my apartment. Like let me be happy in the ways that I can be happy, you know? And you
Yeah.
might not get it, and I think I was just so going with the flow, but it's like I've been putting my foot down with the things that like I actually want to do, and it's just been such a better place. And I feel like I've started to feel, I don't know, more like confident in my choices, more like just assured of myself now that I'm actually doing what I want to do. And that's why I've been like playing volleyball and doing all the cookbook clubs and stuff, and like even how we incorporated like book club into our podcast. And that's actually been so cool because we've had like authors reach out and like getting access to books. And granted, the grief books, but there's like some fun. I mean, like right now we're reading Emily Henry's The Beach Read, and that book is like giddy and sad. Like there's a romance in it, and I think that's really what we experience. Like even on this podcast is like there's just like the happiness, and then the tears. And
Yeah.
that's what we say, like we might laugh, we might cry, because that's true. That's just grief. And obviously I think I've cried like 20 times this episode alone. The tears are a lot closer than they were before,
Yeah.
but that's why you also need to like find those things that like fill your soul, because it's like that can easily just overcome you, or just like you're numb. And I think for so many years I was just numb, and
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that, because I was just like only letting the surface level of myself like operate in the world. And like that's such a weird place to be, that you're just like trying to just keep going on like a robot. Like we're more than that. Like that doesn't make life worth living at all, when you're just
Yeah.
like get up, work, go go home. And um, I think just more recently, which is a long time since everyone passed away, that I'm like living life for me. And that's like a scary but good thing.
Yeah.
But the next thing we want to talk about in this episode, I feel like we have not stayed on script at all
No, we haven't.
whatsoever for this episode. And I feel like we kind of talked about it a little bit, but just kind of the range of feelings of losing your dad, and like even what you're feeling now, like compared, maybe that's something we should talk about, is like the feelings you felt then and things you feel now, that it's been 4 years. Is it like gonna be the 4-year anniversary?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first year after he passed, I don't know what happened. That first year was a blur. The first year I've forgotten all about. So in some ways I feel like the loss is closer than it actually is. But I feel like a lot of people, which is assuring when you are in these grief spaces, that you learn you're like, oh, I'm not the only one that feels like the loss happened not that long ago when years have passed. Obviously, like sadness, of course, is the biggest one. I think there was a long time of anger, and I don't know if it was anger towards him or anger at the world or anger, towards divinity, whatever. But it left me, like, with a lot of questions and just hurt. I think, like, confusion for a long time too of, like, how do you navigate this? At the time my dad passed, I was 24 as well, and I was like, "I'm just a kid. I don't know what to do." But then I think of my brother who was even younger, and I'm like, I can't imagine what it's like to be in his shoes and completely, like, you're now having to trust, like, your older sister to know what she's doing. I wouldn't trust me. I was like, "I wouldn't trust that girl. She doesn't know what she's doing." Um, I think now I'm working on that, like, when I have those pings, that sadness ping hit me at random points, and just being able to, like, acknowledge that and feel that, and not try to rush and, like, shove it away in a box somewhere in my head or in my heart and be like, "Oh, we'll deal with that later." I'm now trying to just, like, acknowledge that and be like, "Oh, like, for some reason, whatever." I'm like, pumpkin patches right now, oof, that's hard. That is hard.
Really? Why?
Growing up, we went to this, like, same pumpkin patch every year was, like, our thing. We went with, like, another family friend, and they're like, my dad being goofy, he, like, made this song about hay in our pants and, like and, like, I don't know, like, pumpkin patches, like, I think his favorite color is orange, like, he is a UT Longhorn fan till he died, like, he watched the Longhorns every Saturday, that was his team. And so, like, seeing the orange now in October, pumpkin patches, like, I know it's very important to my sister that we continue that kind of tradition, but I look at a pumpkin, for some reason, I think of my dad, and I'm just like, "Oh, a little pink, like, a little pink in my heart, it makes me sad."
That's
But then just
funny. I
trying
mean,
to
sad. I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. It's like a pumpkin makes you think of your dad,
Yeah.
weird. Um, but then also just being like, "Okay, we're gonna hold that, and we're gonna try and make these new memories as adults with my brother and sister and just try to make as many as possible," because now I know that I took a lot of shit for granted with my dad being younger, and I should have made more memories, and I should have been more goofy with him, and I shouldn't have been annoyed with him when he was being silly, um, and now just really leaning into that and allowing those memories to happen while coexisting with the sadness. Um, what about your range of emotions with your losses?
Well, first I want to say one, I think you're supposed to be annoyed at your dad or your parents. That's just how it's supposed to be.
Obvious.
But it's just funny because you said the pumpkin patch makes you sad. I've been like, I'm gonna take Jameson, my dog, to a pumpkin patch and I was just like, oh, I need to go to like TJ Maxx and like buy some fall decor
Uh-huh.
and like decorate my place a little bit and I've been doing that. Like last year I started doing that too. I just like actually got more decorations. I've always just thought as like decorations is like a chore and not something that I put effort into.
Mhm.
But I've just been realizing like it makes it feel like more like a home, and it also helps you kind of acknowledge and celebrate the time of the year and the being alive. Like, just
Yeah.
it's a weird thing where it's like you just celebrate and you actually acknowledge the seasons and the time changes and different things. I think that can get lost when you're grieving sometimes, or just like you're moving through
Right.
the motions, that you're not acknowledging like, oh, it's winter, or like, all the different holidays, and holidays can suck. They suck. But I think, there is like a funness of fall, and pumpkins, like, and pumpkin patches, and last year I had some friends over, and like I used to love Halloween growing up, and I want to love Halloween as an adult, so I had some friends over, and we like we carved pumpkins. I got this like brie cheese that's like from Marin French,
Ah, yum.
and like it's orange, so they call it boo brie or something, or like something boo whatever, boo petite, and it's orange, so like I put like puff pastry on it, so when you cut it, it like oozes orange. I like saw it
Oh, how
on
fun.
there, so we did that, and then we made apple cider donuts and just like, did a bunch of like fall activities, and it was really fun. And I just feel like we don't focus on that joy as adults. For some reason we forgo it, like it should only be for kids, like we don't get to experience any of those
Yeah.
things. And granted, I don't have kids, but I was like, I want that joy. Like I want those happy moments for me. Like why did that stop? Especially like so much, like my 20s was just like a blur, you know,
Yeah.
of death. But you know, it's like why wouldn't I try to have as much joyous moments in my life now? And decorating and like pumpkin patches is something that I am actually like, oh, I want to go and just experience that and do those things that like it's not just for kids. Like I want to have those happy moments. But back to the actual question of range of feelings. I mean, it was a hard time because it's like my sister had just like had been in a coma. She come out, she wasn't exactly the same. She definitely needed like help with a lot of things, and then my dad passed away, and then it's just like it's a weird thing to experience. And I just remember like I didn't really talk about it that much. I think it was a lot for my friends too for the first time, and I was keeping very quiet about it. I've always been the more like not sharer. Like I don't share my feelings, which is, you know, if you listen to this, I'm sure people that know me, if they listen, they're like, what the hell, I've never heard Rachel say any of these things. But I was always a person that I keep everything in, and so I just like I didn't want to be like the dead dad's club girl. Like I don't want people to be like, oh, her dad died, and then it just, you know, it just kept adding to the roster, unfortunately. But it was one of those things where I just was so in denial of like, oh, I don't want this to be me and my story. And then, you know, 2 years later, my sister passed away, or it was, I don't know if it was fully 2 years ago, 2 years later. So shit kept hitting the fan, but it definitely was like shock, but it also was denial and like finding friends that like actually got it. And like I had like a temporary best friend during that time. Like his dad passed away, and I just needed that like someone to get it, because I feel like so it's really weird when I feel like your friends don't acknowledge it. And I think part is my fault of like also not talking about it or bringing it up, and then seeming okay that
Yeah.
they don't know what to say. But it is a weird thing when like no one talks about it and no one acknowledges it, and then just to like meet someone that like, oh, I get it. And like he was the first person to bring it up, like, and actually ask me, which is weird because I don't feel like people, maybe, you know, we were 25 at the time, so I don't know if like that's just how people are in their 20s. I'll always appreciate that friendship because I feel like that got me through a lot. But which I feel like I probably should have clinged to, like I wanted grief friends earlier because he was like my grief friend. But it I needed that time. I actually moved to Miami for a year after my dad passed away, and just like lived with my cousin, and like I just did like some random work, like just really like living it up, because I had spent like 3.5 months in the hospital with my sister. I spent a year in Miami and I just like enjoyed it, lived it up. I lived in South Beach, so it was like right in the
Nice.
thick of things, like right by
Yeah.
the beach. So it's a very healing and fun time. Um, and then shit happened again, you know, with my
Yeah.
sister. But it was like a very like just a fun year. And so it kind of, I felt things were kind of feeling normal again. And then of course that's not where my story ends, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But and I think now, and I think about my dad, I think more of like just that I miss that like support,
Mhm.
and like just that unwavering faith. And I'm trying to instill in myself to do that now, and just keep pushing. Because even I think like obviously creating a podcast, like people see you, well, obviously some people will judge you, some people will think it's weird that you want to do that, you know, people have their thoughts, haters are gonna hate. And it is like intimidating to put yourself out there, right? Because people are going to see you and hear the things that you're feeling, and that can be scary. But I know like my family, if they were still here, they'd be like, yeah, do it, like go make something out of the shithole that happened to you.
Right.
And it would just be supportive of me doing something and putting myself out there. Like whatever I did, they were always supportive, which, you know, I miss obviously. So I think now I try to think of the positives, I think the lessons that I learned, and be like really reflective of everything. But yeah, obviously I think the range of feelings is like sadness, despair, loneliness, all these things. But I am trying to be more just like what can I take away from this, it's obviously always still there, and those deep feelings can feel as raw as they did now. Obviously, if you're seeing the video version of this, me and Kendall cried like numerous times throughout this episode. So it's still there. It doesn't ever go away. It hasn't been at the top of my mind because I also lost my sister and my mom, but it is there, and I still do cry about my dad. It'll just be like there, and then it just comes up to the surface. So I think you can feel anything at any time, but I think now I'm trying to just continue to push forward, and all the nice like comments of people saying that this podcast is helping them and all those things is also the encouragement I feel like from them. Also, I keep seeing like 17 on so many different things, which I always take as a sign for my sister of like just different numbers that I look at. I just looked at my phone and it's 517. That's so
Oh my
fun.
god, yeah, here it's 7:17. Oh my god, how weird.
That is so. See,
Ooh, we
and
should talk about your Apple Watch thing.
oh yeah, so
We could talk about here, we could talk about it on another episode, but
I
that was really something.
I think we might as well talk about it now since we just got a weird sign from my like what I literally said that I see 17 a lot for things, and I take it as a sign of support for my sister. And it is 17, and my sister was born on March 17th, so I always see 17. I see it in a lot of like just the numbers I review or just different random stuff. So that's funny that I literally looked at my clock. It's 517, and you can doubt, but like it's one of those things where like you want a sign and you see it at that time. I always take it as reassurance, and I have been to a what do you call it? A psychic medium. And he did say that my sister's very active, and I feel like I do feel that in a lot of ways. And I've never seen as many 17s as I have since we started this podcast. So I take it as a sign that like she's encouraging and supporting.
Oh,
and so to keep going. But yeah, the watch thing was weird. I have an Apple Watch, and I was talking to someone that we're going to do a feature on. We're launching a Substack and going to be sharing more grief stories there. But I was talking to someone, he was telling me his story. He lost his wife. It was a very beautiful story. Like, I'm going to follow up on that more. But I was telling him, because we were sharing kind of some grief stories, and I told him that my mom, she went very religious when my sister passed away, and I think she just had a really hard time with my sister passing away, and she clung to her faith and to try to make sense of it. I think that's what happened. You need to find an answer to things. But it came off to me as very cold. And she was just like saying all stuff. Like, she didn't even hug me, like, and we were not that way. So like, we were super, she was very loving. So it was a really hard thing to like, not get it. You're like, why am I alone in the situation? My mom's here. And that was never a relationship. And then I literally, as I was telling that story, my Apple Watch just like pinged and it said, "I'm sorry." And I was like, it was just like the weirdest timing, because when I said it and I stopped and I was like, that was so weird, that my Apple Watch, and it was just like at the right timing when I was saying that. And so yeah, it was weird. And I mentioned it to him, and he also said like, "Oh, that's totally a sign for your mom." And I feel like it's the most clear sign that I probably got from my mom, but I do believe in those things. And it was weird because like I didn't like hit my watch or anything. But yeah, speaking of signs, that was crazy. Also, like the timing of just when I said 17 and it was 17.
Yeah, that's a very weird sign.
Yeah.
Check your clocks.
Yeah.
The next question we have is the ways that we coped after our losses of our dads. And so obviously you've gone through quite a bit, so you probably had gone through every coping mechanism in the book, but what were things that either healthily or unhealthily, that was supportive or unsupportive? I think like, because even the unsupportive things is realistic to people who are in these situations themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so I did, after my passed away, I did go to Miami for a year, and I wasn't doing anything like super crazy, but I just was like living it up, going all these places, enjoying Miami. And then I think I was still like semi-optimistic after my dad passed away because I had my sister. And then like after that, it was, a lot of feelings were like eating my feelings. And, I've mentioned it multiple times where I was like, oh, this will only feel right if I find like start my own family, and
Yeah.
that's just like not the way to go. And I see a lot of people say that too, like the holidays will only feel good once you have a family. Like I've seen other people comment that, and I don't know if that's a good way, now that I've stepped away from it, is a good way to think about it, because I think it's like you're looking for like a family to replace your family.
Yeah.
And I think if you're just looking for a replacement, like on par, like I lost you or replaced you with you, that's not good. And I think it's easy to think that, will. And I definitely leaned into that for a bit. And I was just like catching frogs, because I also was like, I was just losing people. I was like eating every brownie I could see. Like I wasn't in a good space. I wasn't working out. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was like mentally, physically not taking care of myself.
Wow.
So obviously not a good time to be dating. So I think those were like bad, just like not helpful things,
Yeah.
right? Because it's
Yeah.
like it doesn't help when then you look at the mirror and you're like, oh, who is that person? You know, because
Yeah.
you're not taking care of yourself. And then the positives, I would say like the positives have been even more recent. I was just like moving through life. I don't think it wasn't as memorable, you know, like I'm still travel and, you know, try to spend more time with family and do different things. So like, yes, in some ways, you know, I was there, you know, there was positives, but I think it wasn't until now I'm like, okay, the support group's been super helpful, making grief friends and just like saying the things and not keeping like my grief life and like other friends so separate, I think has also been really helpful. And then like obviously this podcast has been like, I feel like it's life changing, honestly. Like, and I think it will continue to be. I I do think there's power in sharing your story. And even when I look on TikTok and like other things, like there's so many people that are experiencing this and are feeling so many of the same feelings. And it's so important for people to like not feel alone in this experience. So and just like, you know, I will organize events and do volleyball and do all this stuff. I think it's all been just fun. Like if it's something I want to do, I'll do it. Like I wanted a patch jacket, I'm starting a patch jacket. You know, like if it's something I want to do, like I wanted to junk scrapbook, now I jump scrapbook. You know, like instead of just being like, oh, that's something I want to do, I do it.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like power in that, of actually just like doing the things that you want and not putting it off. Because also,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't know how much time you have. I don't like to think of it like so like that, but it's like you want to enjoy your life, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you could put it off. And it's like my sister died when she was 29, so it's like I'm
Which
older
is
than she.
crazy.
Yeah,
Like
and I'm older than she ever was, you know. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, I
That
just
breaks my heart. Yeah, I'm about to
yeah,
turn 29 this year, and, like, it just feels so young. Like, it just feels like
yeah,
your life is literally just about to start.
yeah, and that's so shitty, obviously,
Yeah.
but I, you know, you want to live still a good life, and I'm like, I'm here, and there has to be a reason for that. So I want to still feel like I see joy and experience joy, and that's been such a focus. But that has been more that I realized I realized that now, that just I was missing focusing on like what makes me happy and what I need, because I'm so like, okay, this is what they think I should be doing, or you know, whatever. um and just like, yeah, just accepting like obviously my life is very griefy, like I lost both my parents and my sister, so like, yeah,
Yeah.
some days are gonna be shit. So yeah, I did cry this morning all morning because I saw a TikTok about sisters. Like that is my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've cried 20 times on this podcast. We were talking about, you know, dead dads and the Dead Dads Club. Like it's gonna be sad, and but we also laugh, and I think that's important to note that we laugh a lot.
Yeah, we
Um,
do.
even, you know, with each other a lot. I feel like, you know, me and Kendall, we talk all the time, and we do. I feel like we laugh a lot, and every time we talk for like hours.
Yeah.
And I it's funny because like our line is like there might be laughter, there'll be tears, and that it's just like I don't think people realize how true that is.
Yeah.
It's even with our support group. I mean, we our last one we were talking about tree pods and how we want to be tree pods and tree farms, and it's like we're laughing amongst like the sad times, but it, you know, you
Yeah,
have to find laughter or joy in the sadness, because there can be so much sadness, obviously.
absolutely.
Look at me. But look at the joy. If you see the video, you can see that my joy is on my lap and is my dog.
Yeah. A golden doodle.
A labradoodle.
A labradoodle.
Stop doodling him. Jameson's a boy and a labradoodle, and everyone thinks he's a girl and a golden doodle.
Are only girls golden doodles?
No, I
Okay.
don't know why. Everyone assumes.
Well, on our normal episodes, we typically wrap up with a challenge. And so this is our little Dead Dad Club challenge to you. If you are a part of our little group here, you identified with this episode because you also are in the Dead Dad Club. But as we have talked about quite a bit on this episode about reflecting on our grief journey and then trying to pave a way going forward that is with like joy and optimism and light. But we hope that you take time to reflect on your own grief journey and then acknowledge the things in your life that maybe you want to start doing or be doing differently in lieu of the passing of your father or your loved one. Like always, we'll have resources in the show notes, and we have new episodes about a grief topic every Tuesday, and we also have new episodes every Monday with our book club covering a grief book.
So this is like a special episode. We're back to like an official episode with our general same format next week. We just felt like it was important to honor our dads in October. I feel like it was too much of a coincidence. They both had diabetes. They passed away in October.
Yeah.
Like, if we didn't do an episode in October, that I feel like that was just, it was meant to be that we do a special episode for them. But as always, you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at 2girlswithgriefpod. And you can email us at 2girlswithgrief@gmail.com. We love reading just any comments you have, suggestions of topics, anything like that. And also, we talked specifically about our dads. I think it's very applicable to anybody. So it doesn't have to be just your dad's club. This is just the club that we have in common. As I mentioned, I'm part of a member of 2 other clubs, so it can be applicable.
Active.
Yeah, I have too many memberships. It's getting expensive, but I feel like a lot of it's just applicable regardless, and you kind of take away or relate to a lot of things no matter who you lost. We just think it's important to kind of honor people that are important to you in different ways. So this is the first time we've done this episode of like more in depth, actually sharing more details about the actual loss and more of a play-by-play, I think. But yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed this episode as much as you could. Sorry for all the tears. It's a lot. Hopefully you still took away something from the episode, and I say like enjoyed, but I don't know, take away something from the episode. I feel like it's the better way to say it. But we will see you next week on Monday and Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.